In trying to choose a place for this assignment, my first thought was, of course, my hometown of Jackson, Wyoming. My next thought was that my relationship with my hometown has evolved in complex and disheartening ways. Truthfully, I have only spent a small chunk of time in Jackson over the last 3 years. My dad, an architect, designed and built our house in East Cass Creek, Jackson, and moved into it with my mom and baby older brother in 2004. Similar financial decisions were being made countrywide at the time by young couples. I was born in the hospital down the road. This is what the town looked like then, and this is what it looks like now. I no longer feel it is the same place as the town I grew up. Both my separated parents had to move across an imagined political boundary and very real physical mountain range to Teton Valley, Idaho in 2023 because they could no longer afford to live in Jackson. The context that contributed to our move tells an interesting story about my hometown and is undeniably resonant with the local displacement that Jared Diamond described in Collapse. The social readjustment and exploitation in the face of development, the entanglement of economic and environmental systems, and the corruption of local community infrastructure. Wyoming has extraordinarily wealth-friendly tax and trust laws. Jackson had once been a destination for mountain lovers, outdoor people, some true cowboys, legit ski bums splitting rent 15 ways, and yes, also admittedly wealthy, industrial, corporate, oil, and good investment type retirees. It was well understood growing up that the wealth in Jackson was a product of two component parts. Firstly, the state of Wyoming has no income tax, and secondly, if you're gonna live in Wyoming, you want to live in Jackson because it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. As a result, despite having just 4% of Wyoming's population, in 2023, Teton County residents earned 23% of the state's total personal income and essentially half of its total investment income. Teton County generated more than 50% of the state's mandatory 30% lodging tax in fiscal year 2024. The cost of living in Teton County in the second quarter of 2024, based on a statewide index of 100, was 176. Housing alone was 239 according to the index, meaning that Teton residents paid $239 for every $100 paid by residents statewide. A 2-bedroom unfurnished apartment in Teton County costs an average of $3,354 a month to rent, not counting gas and electric bills. In 2020, my dad and I moved out of East Jackson across town to the Blair Place apartments. This shift from middle-income Jackson lifestyle to a working-class, middle-lower-income part of town was eye-opening. My parents were working as, one, a self-employed architect, and two, a high school Spanish teacher during COVID. So we weren't above the effects of the pandemic, and they were a large reason that we had to move. However, there were larger forces at play, especially an absurd real estate market and cost of living. Schechner, who operates the Chartu Institute think tank, suspects that the reason for Teton County's tremendous growth in investment income is the Trump's tax cuts of 2017. Combined with COVID migration, he wrote, starting in 2019, the major socioeconomic effect on Jackson Hole was that both home prices and investment income doubled in 3 years. Personally, I saw the same type of affluent Californian and mogul Texan flooding into Jackson. Yes, wearing plasticky cowboy hats and renting far too nice ski gear for their skill level, as Diamond described in the Bitterroot Valley. There are large cultural chasms between immigrants and locals. The economic impact was predictable and benefited predictable spheres of influence. Housing and tourism has boomed while politicians and influential members of the community aim to keep development of affordable housing unbuilt. Wyoming itself has sought to capitalize on Teton's high property values, seeking to lease state school trust land to maximize revenues. I was actually sitting as a student school board member during these negotiations, and what the decision came down to was the fact that our district was underfunded because the state does not take into account the economic bubble in Jackson, which means that we have more underprivileged kids who need programming and support but are not getting it. Diamond describes that graduates from the Bitterroot High School usually left the town and Montana because they are not good opportunities for them to build a life there. In the Bitterroot Valley, locals were stripped of their spaciousness, the wholeness and agricultural productivity of their land, while also overstripping natural resources. Like in the Bitterroot Valley, migrants to Jackson do not contribute to the well-being of the community proportionately, or appreciate the entire working class that makes their luxurious escapist lives possible. While Jackson also lost our spaciousness, but it also brought too many people for the environment to sustain. It brought completely unproductive workers in tech and finance who are pricing out the Hispanic population and discouraging young people from putting down roots in the community. Even with my degree and accolades, I would have a hard time moving back to Jackson and making a living. The Bitterroot Valley face a similar problem. As Diamond described, their 50s were increasing steeply while residents in their 30s have actually decreased. In my opinion, forcing out the working productive class is a self-defeating economic strategy. Let's talk about race because it's an integral part of Jackson's history. The Latino population in Jackson has grown from nearly none 30 years ago to an estimated 30% of Teton County today. This is not the case for the rest of Wyoming. The flow of immigration, largely from the central Mexican state of Tlaxcala, started in the late 20th century. According to a high school boy named Castellan in our local newspaper, a lot of Mexican dads are in construction and moms are in cleaning houses because that's how they can make the most money. The population in Blair Place Apartments is overwhelmingly Latino. When my dad and I first moved in, we were strangers to the familial vibe. But after a year in the apartment together, we were eating tamales with our neighbors. The cultural exchange was good for me. Right before we moved out of Blair Place, a, quote, opportunistic real estate private equity investment firm headquartered near San Francisco, California, that was founded in 1990 and specializes in the acquisition, rehabilitation, and management of multifamily and hospitality property nationwide, bought the Blair Place and planned on renovating the buildings into condominiums to profit from their venture, also raising rent, eliminating precious rental housing and forcing my neighbors to move, likely out of the town of Jackson into Victor, which is what happened to us. So, like in the Bitterroot Valley, Jackson immigrants and their economic splash also exacerbated more complex multicultural tensions within the community. While Diamond did not explicitly talk about race in the Montana chapter, he talked about socioeconomics, which means a very similar thing in my hometown. Another critical difference between Jackson and Bitterroot is that Jackson's wealthy are a tier more removed and have successfully displaced the local population and fundamentally changed the character of my hometown.